Why do most transatlantic flights leave at night? Why, if you open a flight radar at 3 a.m., is the sky full of planes, many of them without passengers? And why can the same aircraft be considered old for passengers, but still fly for decades afterward? At first, these seem like completely different questions: schedules, logistics, aircraft lifespan. But if you look closer, they're all part of the same system, a system built around one thing: efficiency. Because aviation doesn't really work the way passengers think it does. From the outside, it feels simple. You buy a ticket, go to the airport, board a plane, and fly from point A to point B. But behind that, there's a completely different logic. Planes don't fly when it's convenient for people. They fly when it's optimal for the system. Have you ever noticed that flights from Los Angeles to Paris almost always leave around sunset? That's not a coincidence. And it's not about passenger comfort. It's about how crossing the Atlantic actually works. As long as a plane is flying over Europe or the US, everything is straightforward. It's tracked by radar, guided by controllers, and constantly monitored. But the moment it moves out over the Atlantic, everything changes. There's no dense radar coverage like over land. It's a massive area where you simply can't manage traffic with the same precision. And yet, hundreds of flights cross it every single day. So instead of controlling every aircraft in real time, the system does something different. It builds structure in advance. Aircraft are assigned to predefined air routes, and here's the key detail. Those routes are one way. At certain times of the day, traffic flows in one direction. At other times, it reverses. At night, most flights go from North America to Europe. During the day, they go the other way. This isn't about convenience. It's about creating order in a place where traditional control doesn't fully work. But there's another factor that makes night flights especially efficient: wind. At cruising altitude, there are powerful air currents called jet streams. They move from west to east and can significantly boost an aircraft's ground speed, sometimes by over 150 miles per hour. So the plane isn't just flying, it's being pushed. And at night, these winds are easier to use and more predictable. During the day, solar heating creates more turbulence, which makes the atmosphere less stable. At night, conditions are generally smoother, making it easier to plan efficient routes. Sometimes that translates into meaningful savings in both time and fuel. But even that isn't the main reason. The real reason is time. An aircraft is an extremely expensive asset, and it can't afford to sit still. If a flight leaves New York in the evening, it arrives in Europe early in the morning, which means that same aircraft can quickly move on to its next flight, either within Europe or back across the Atlantic. If that same flight happened during the day, it would arrive at night, and that's a problem. At major airports like London or Paris, night operations are heavily restricted. Flights can't just arrive at any time. They have to fit into specific time windows. And even if a plane lands at night, it often can't continue operating efficiently. It ends up sitting on the ground, and for an airline, that means lost money. There's another issue too: airport congestion. Morning in Europe is a peak arrival window for long-haul flights, but they don't all arrive at once. They're carefully spaced out to avoid overloading airspace and runways. If those same flights arrived during the day, they'd mix with short-haul traffic across Europe, and that would create bottlenecks. Planes would be forced to wait, circle in holding patterns, and burn extra fuel. The night model solves this. It acts like a filter, spreading aircraft out over time and keeping the system stable. So from a passenger's perspective, a night flight just feels like a convenient way to sleep through the journey. But in reality, night is when the entire system works at its peak. It's the moment when everything aligns: air traffic flow, airport capacity, wind conditions, and aircraft utilization. That's why transatlantic flights leave at night. Not because it's more convenient, but because without it, the system would be far less efficient and significantly more expensive. And while passenger aviation uses the night for efficiency, there's another part of aviation where night isn't just useful, it's essential. Now imagine this. What if all cargo aviation suddenly stopped flying at night? Not partially, completely. Same aircraft, same routes, same distances. Only one thing changes: time. At first, it doesn't sound like a big deal. Flights just move to daytime. But in reality, the system would start breaking down almost immediately. Overnight delivery would disappear. Planes would start waiting in line. Airports would become congested. and the entire chain would slow down. Because this isn't about how fast planes fly. It's about how time is structured inside the system. Cargo aviation isn't really about flying, it's about synchronization. Packages are collected during the day. By evening, they converge at major hubs. And at night, the most critical part begins. Aircraft arrive almost at the same time. Cargo is unloaded, sorted, and reloaded, and within hours, it's already on its way again. This isn't just an airport. It's a massive system running on a single, coordinated rhythm. And if even one part fails, the entire chain starts to break. But there's something else most people don't notice. In logistics, speed isn't about the aircraft, it's about everything around it. At night, the sky is less congested. Fewer flights mean fewer delays. Aircraft spend less time waiting for takeoff and less time holding before landing. But the real difference is on the ground. At night, roads are clearer. Trucks aren't stuck in traffic. Sorting facilities operate without overload. And that leads to something counterintuitive. The same distance can be completed faster than during the day. Not because the plane is faster, but because the entire system is. There's also predictability. Cargo operations are timed almost to the minute. If one aircraft is delayed, it can impact dozens of downstream processes. Night provides stability, less traffic, fewer variables, fewer disruptions. But this system only looks perfect on paper. In reality, it's incredibly fragile. It takes just one disruption for everything to start slowing down. The simplest example is weather. Snow, fog, or strong winds can effectively shut down the entire chain. And in those moments, you realize something important. This system isn't just built on aircraft and algorithms, it runs on people. Here's what one delivery worker wrote. I work at FedEx. This week was really tough because of a snowstorm. Operations were almost shut down, about 90%. Many employees were sent home. Customers were frustrated because they didn't receive their packages. But please don't blame the people doing the delivery. If the weather doesn't allow movement, it's not our fault. And if you're affected, we are too. Because in moments like this, everyone loses. And once you understand that cargo aviation depends on the night to function, it raises the next question. Why are these aircraft able to keep operating for decades, long after they're considered too old for passengers? Now think about this. An aircraft flies passengers for 20 to 25 years, and then it gets retired. That should be the end of its life. But in many cases, it isn't. That same aircraft can keep flying for another 10, 15, even 20 years, this time as a cargo plane. So why does that happen? Why does an aircraft considered too old for passengers suddenly become perfectly usable again? The answer is more interesting than it seems. Because in aviation, age doesn't really mean what you think it means. Aircraft aren't judged by years alone. There are more important metrics. One of them is cycles. A cycle is one takeoff and one landing, and it's one of the biggest factors in how an aircraft wears out. Because every time a plane takes off, the cabin is pressurized. And every time it lands, that pressure is released. The fuselage is constantly expanding and contracting, almost like it's breathing. And over time, that creates structural fatigue. This is where the key difference appears. Passenger aircraft fly more frequently, more short flights, more cycles. Cargo aircraft are different. They tend to fly fewer flights, but over longer distances. So two aircraft of the same age can be in completely different structural condition. One might be close to its limit, the other might only be halfway there. In many cases, the passenger aircraft actually ages faster. But it's not just about physics, it's also about economics. Passenger aviation is highly competitive. Aircraft have to be fuel efficient, quiet, modern, and comfortable. As soon as they start falling behind newer models, they're phased out, even if they're still technically capable of flying. Cargo aviation works differently. Cargo doesn't care about seats. It doesn't care about entertainment screens. It doesn't care about comfort. It only cares about one thing: how much it costs to move a ton of goods. And this is where older aircraft suddenly become valuable. Because they've already been paid off, they can keep generating revenue even if they burn more fuel. That's why many aircraft get a second life. They're converted, seats are removed, structures are reinforced, large cargo doors are added, and the aircraft begins a new career. Of course, there are still limits. Every aircraft has a structural lifespan. It's not infinite. But because cargo aircraft operate differently, That limit takes much longer to reach. And there's a great example of this, the MD-11, a three-engine aircraft that once flew passengers. Over time, it became less competitive. It burned more fuel than newer designs, and airlines gradually retired it from passenger service. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. Cargo operators began using these aircraft instead, and suddenly, what used to be a disadvantage no longer mattered. Because a cargo aircraft doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be profitable, and if it's already paid off, it can keep working. So today, you see something unusual but completely logical. Aircraft that disappeared from passenger service are still flying all over the world, just not with people on board. Now, they carry cargo, and that leads to the bigger idea. Cargo aircraft don't last longer because they're stronger. They last longer because they're used differently. They accumulate wear more slowly, and they get a second life. And that's why the same aircraft can carry passengers for decades, and then continue flying cargo for decades more.